The television studio was bright with many lights. Captain Lorenzo Bianchi sat in a comfortable chair, but did not feel comfortable at all. His Swiss Guard uniform with blue and gold stripes looked very official against the dark background of the set. This was the first time in history that an active Swiss Guard was giving a live interview about a pope. Lorenzo looked at the famous interviewer sitting across from him. Millions of people around the world were watching right now. His throat felt dry. "Welcome, Captain Bianchi," said the interviewer with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "The world is very curious about Pope Robert Prevost. You see him every day. What can you tell us about him?" Lorenzo took a deep breath. He had asked for permission to do this interview. Some people at the Vatican were not happy about it, but things were changing with the new pope. "Pope Robert Prevost is not like other popes before him," Lorenzo began. His Italian accent was strong, but his words were clear. On his first day as pope, he did something that surprised us all. The interviewer leaned forward, interested. "What was that, Captain?" "He asked us to call him Father Robert when no visitors were around. No pope has ever asked us to do that before. The Swiss Guard has protected popes for over 500 years. We follow strict rules. We use proper titles." Lorenzo remembered that first meeting with the new pope. All the Swiss Guards were lined up in their formal uniforms. They expected a short greeting. Instead, Pope Prevost had walked slowly down the line. He stopped at each guard and asked their name and where they came from. He remembered every name. He told us that we would protect him, but he would also look after us, Lorenzo said. He said we were all part of God's family. The interviewer nodded but looked a little disappointed. She wanted bigger secrets. But what about inside the Vatican? There must be conflicts about his new ways. Lorenzo smiled slightly. Yes, there are some who do not like change. Pope Prevost comes from Peru, where he worked with poor people for many years. He brings those experiences with him. Some important people at the Vatican are not comfortable with his simple ways. Lorenzo told the story of his second week guarding the Pope. It was very late at night, and he was standing outside the Pope's private rooms. Suddenly the door opened, and Pope Prevost came out wearing simple clothes, not his papal robes. "Where are you going, Holy Father?" Lorenzo had asked, concerned. "I heard one of the kitchen workers has a sick child," the Pope had said. "I am going to visit them and pray with the family." Lorenzo explained that this was not normal. Popes did not usually visit Vatican workers in their homes. I told him we needed to arrange security first. He looked at me and said, "Then arrange it quickly, Lorenzo. A child is suffering." The interview room was completely quiet now. Even the camera operators were listening closely. We went to a small apartment where a Vatican cook lived. The child had a high fever. Pope Prevost sat by the bed for an hour, talking with the parents and praying. Before we left, he asked me to call the Vatican doctor to come check on the child that night. Lorenzo looked directly at the camera now. The next day, he ordered that all Vatican workers must have better health care for their families. He said, "What good is it if we care for beautiful buildings, but not for the people who work in them?" The interviewer seemed truly interested now. This is quite different from what we usually hear about life inside the Vatican. Lorenzo nodded. Yes, Pope Prevost says the Church must be more open, more honest. That is why he allowed me to speak with you today. He believes the time of secrets in the Church must end. The interview continued as the studio lights seemed to grow warmer. Captain Lorenzo took a sip of water. The first few minutes had gone well, but now the interviewer wanted more details. "Tell us about a normal day with Pope Prevost," she said. "What does he do that might surprise people?" Lorenzo thought for a moment. "He wakes up very early, before the sun rises. Most popes have staff who bring them breakfast and help them dress. But Pope Prevost makes his own simple breakfast, just bread and coffee, and he dresses himself in his simple white clothes." The interviewer looked surprised. "But surely someone must help him with his official robes for ceremonies." "Yes, for big events. He follows tradition. But he often says, Jesus did not have servants to dress him. Pope Prevost believes in doing things for himself when he can. Lorenzo shared how shocked many Vatican workers were when they first saw the Pope walking alone through the gardens at dawn. It was a time when most people were still sleeping. One morning, I was on early duty. I saw him kneeling in the garden, praying as the sun came up. When he finished, he saw me and invited me to walk with him. He asked about my family in Milan. He remembered my mother was sick. He had asked about her weeks before. He remembered her name. The interviewer nodded. That seems like a small thing, though. It is, and it is not, Lorenzo said. When you are the leader of over 1 billion Catholics, remembering the name of your guard-stick mother is not expected. But this is how he treats everyone. The woman who cleans his room says he knows the names of her children. The kitchen staff say he visits them to thank them for meals. Lorenzo then shared a story that had not been told before. Last month, there was a big meeting with important cardinals. They were discussing church money and rules. The meeting went through lunchtime. The Pope asked his assistant to order food. When the food came, Pope Prevost noticed it was only enough for the cardinals and himself. Lorenzo leaned forward. He asked his assistant, "Where is the food for the security and staff?" The assistant said they would eat later. The Pope stood up and said the meeting would wait. He would not eat until everyone working at the meeting also had food. The studio was quiet. This was a side of the Pope no one had heard about. The cardinals were not happy, Lorenzo continued. One of them said it was not proper protocol. The Pope smiled and said, "Then we should change the protocol." Jesus fed everyone at his table. Lorenzo explained that news of this event spread quickly through the Vatican. The next day, kitchen staff and cleaners and guards all talked about it. It may seem small to outsiders, but in the Vatican, where strict rules have existed for hundreds of years, this was big news. The interviewer asked if there were other traditions the new pope was changing. Yes, many, Lorenzo said. For example, in the past, when popes traveled, they stayed in special houses or nice hotels. But when Pope Prevost visited a poor area in Rome last week, he stayed in the local priest's small apartment. His security team was very worried. The area was not safe, but he said, "If it is safe enough for the people who live here, it is safe enough for me." Lorenzo explained that this made protecting the Pope much harder for the Swiss Guard. But we understand why he does these things. He wants to be close to ordinary people. He says the church has been too far from the people for too long. The interviewer checked her notes. And this is only his first month as Pope. What else can you tell us about his plans? Lorenzo smiled. That is a good question for part 3 of our talk. The interview moved into deeper topics as the camera lights continued to shine on Captain Lorenzo. The interviewer checked her notes again and looked up with a serious face. Captain Bianchi, there are rumors that Pope Prevost is planning big changes to Vatican money and wealth. Is this true? Lorenzo nodded slowly. Yes, this is perhaps the most important thing to understand about the new Pope. He believes the Church has too much wealth, while many people in the world have too little. He explained how in the Pope's first week, he walked through the Vatican Museum with its gold art and expensive treasures. The Pope had stopped at a gold cross covered with jewels. He looked at that cross for a long time, Lorenzo said. Then he turned to the museum director and asked, "How many hungry children could we feed with this?" The director had no answer. The next day, Pope Prevost called a meeting with the Vatican bank leaders. No Swiss guards were in that room, but Lorenzo had heard from his friend who guarded the door. The meeting lasted 5 hours. When people came out, some of the bank officials looked upset. One was even crying. Later, we learned that Pope Prevost had ordered a complete check of all Vatican money. He wanted to know where every dollar came from and where it was going. The interviewer leaned forward. That must have caused problems with some powerful people. Yes, Lorenzo said simply. There are many in the church who worry about change. The Pope told them, "We cannot preach about helping the poor while we sit on gold chairs." Lorenzo shared how the Pope had already sold a famous painting from his private rooms. The money from the sale went to build a new hospital in a poor part of Peru where the Pope had worked for many years. He also ordered that his meals should cost no more than what an average Italian family spends on food. The fancy cooks were not happy, but he said the extra money would go to the Vatican soup kitchen that feeds homeless people. The studio was very quiet now. These were big changes for an institution as old as the Catholic Church. Last week, Lorenzo continued, a rich businessman came to visit the Pope. He brought an expensive gift, a gold pen in a special box. The Pope thanked him, but then said something interesting. He said, I will accept this on behalf of the church, but I will sell it to help the poor. I hope that honors your gift more than if I kept it. The businessman was surprised, but not angry. He ended up giving more money to the church's work with poor people. Pope Prevost also changed where he lives, Lorenzo explained. Normally popes live in a big apartment in the Apostolic Palace. It has many rooms and fancy furniture. But he chose to live in a simple 2-room apartment in the Santa Marta building where visitors stay. He said the palace was too big for one person. The interviewer seemed truly interested now. How have the other church leaders responded to these changes? Some support him. Others are worried, Lorenzo said honestly. Change is always hard, especially in the Vatican, where some traditions are hundreds of years old. But Pope Prevost says gently to them, if Jesus returned today, would he be more pleased with our fine buildings or with how we help the suffering? Lorenzo explained that each evening, the Pope reads letters from ordinary Catholics around the world. He keeps a small notebook where he writes down their problems. He told me once, these letters tell me more about what the church should do than any meeting with cardinals. The interviewer checked the time. We need to take a short break. When we come back, Captain Bianchi will tell us about how Pope Prevost is changing the church's approach to modern problems. After the short break, the interview with Captain Lorenzo Bianchi continued. The television studio was buzzing with excitement. People working behind the cameras were whispering to each other. This interview was getting more views than expected. Welcome back, the interviewer said. Captain Bianchi, you mentioned that Pope Prevost is changing how the church deals with modern problems. Can you tell us more about that? Lorenzo nodded. One of the biggest changes is how he talks to people who disagree with the church. In the past, some church leaders would argue or scold people with different ideas. Pope Prevost is different. He listens first. Lorenzo told a story about a group of young protesters who had come to St. Peter's Square last week. They held signs about climate change. They shouted that the church needed to do more to protect the earth. Security wanted to remove them. This is normal when people protest at the Vatican. But the Pope saw them from his window. He sent word that he wanted to meet with 5 of them. The meeting was set up quickly. Lorenzo was one of the guards in the room. The young people were nervous at first, but Pope Prevost made them feel welcome. He did not lecture them. He asked questions and wrote notes as they spoke. He wanted to learn from them. The interviewer seemed surprised. And what came from this meeting? 2 important things, Lorenzo explained. First, the Pope announced the next day that the Vatican would install more solar panels and use electric cars. Second, he invited one of the young protesters, a scientist, to join a church committee on caring for the environment. Lorenzo shared how shocked some older cardinals were about this decision. They complained that the scientist was not even Catholic. The Pope had smiled and said, God made the earth for all people, not just Catholics. We must learn from everyone who wants to protect it. The interviewer made a note. What about other modern issues? How does he handle disagreements inside the church? Lorenzo thought carefully before answering. This was a sensitive topic. Pope Prevost believes in talking openly about hard questions. Last month, there was a big meeting with bishops from many countries. They discussed many difficult topics that Catholics disagree about. Some bishops wanted to avoid these topics because they cause arguments. Lorenzo remembered standing outside that meeting room. He could hear the loud voices through the door. The Pope let everyone speak their mind. When some bishops became angry with each other, he stopped the meeting. He asked everyone to pray in silence for 5 minutes. When they started talking again, their voices were calmer. The Pope had told the bishops something important that day. Lorenzo shared the words as best he could remember them. The Pope said, "We cannot be afraid of questions. If our faith is strong, questions will not break it. They will make it stronger. And if someone disagrees with us, we must not see them as an enemy. They are our brother or sister who sees things differently." The interviewer nodded. "That is a very different approach than we have seen before." "Yes," Lorenzo agreed. Pope Prevost says the Church has often been too quick to say no and too slow to listen. He wants to change that. Lorenzo explained how the Pope had started a new practice. Every month, he meets with people who feel hurt by the Church or who disagree with Church teachings. These meetings are private, with no media allowed. He does not always change his mind after these meetings. The Church has teachings that are very old and important, but he believes that listening with respect is the first step to healing old wounds. The interviewer checked her notes again. After our next break, we will hear about how Pope Prevost has dealt with the Church's most difficult problem, the abuse scandals. When the interview resumed, the studio felt different. Even the bright lights seemed more serious. The interviewer looked directly at Captain Lorenzo. "Captain Bianchi, we must talk about a difficult subject. For many years, the Catholic Church has faced serious problems about priests who hurt children and how the Church handled these cases. How is Pope Prevost dealing with this painful issue?" Lorenzo took a deep breath. This was the hardest part of the interview, but also the most important. On his 3rd day as Pope, he called a special meeting. He invited people who had been hurt by priests when they were children. No cameras were allowed. No other Church officials were there. Just the Pope and these brave people who had suffered. Lorenzo had been outside that meeting room. He could not hear what was said, but he saw the people when they came out. Many were crying. The Pope came out last. His face was wet with tears too. The next morning, Lorenzo continued. Pope Prevost canceled all his regular meetings. He went to his office very early and called the head of the office that deals with abuse cases. He told him, "Bring me every open case file. I want to read them all." The interviewer looked surprised. "All of them? There must be hundreds." "Yes," Lorenzo nodded. The Pope worked for 2 days and 2 nights. He only stopped for short breaks to eat and pray. His staff was worried about his health, but he would not stop. After those 2 days, Pope Prevost made a big announcement to church leaders. Lorenzo explained what happened. The Pope created new rules. First, any priest accused of hurting children would be removed from working with people right away. Second, all cases must be reported to local police, not just church officials. Third, no one can be moved to another job to hide problems. But the biggest change came next. It shocked many people in the Vatican. Pope Prevost created a new group to watch over abuse cases. Half the people in this group are not priests or church workers. They are regular people, including some who were hurt by priests when they were young. This group has the power to check any church record and talk to any church leader. The interviewer leaned forward. Has the Vatican ever allowed outsiders to have this kind of power before? Never, Lorenzo said simply. Some cardinals argued against it. They said church matters should stay private. The Pope listened to them politely, then said, "Our privacy is not more important than children's safety." Lorenzo explained that Pope Prevost also ordered a complete search of all church records going back 50 years. He wanted to find any old cases that were not handled properly. Last week, he met with bishops from around the world. He told them, "The time of hiding problems is over. We must face our failures honestly if we want people to trust us again." The Pope had made one more important change. In the past, people who reported abuse sometimes had to sign papers promising not to talk about their cases. Pope Prevost ended this practice. He said that healing begins with truth-telling. People who were hurt must be able to share their stories if they choose to. The interviewer nodded solemnly. These are major changes. Have they been difficult to implement? Yes, Lorenzo admitted. Change is never easy, especially in an old institution like the Church. But the Pope told the cardinals, if we truly believe in God's forgiveness, we must first be honest about our sins. Lorenzo explained that every Friday, Pope Prevost now visits a center that helps people who were hurt by priests. He does not bring cameras or reporters. He goes to listen and learn. He told me once, Lorenzo said quietly, the Church cannot preach about healing until we help heal the wounds we have caused. The interview moved to a lighter topic after the serious discussion. The interviewer smiled and asked, Captain Bianchi, many people are curious about Pope Prevost as a person. What does he do when he is not working? Does he have any hobbies or interests? Lorenzo smiled for the first time in several minutes. Yes, the Pope is a very interesting person. He loves music, especially jazz. He played the saxophone when he was younger, and sometimes he still plays. Last week, one of the Swiss guards heard music coming from his apartment. It was the Pope playing his old saxophone. The interviewer looked surprised. The Pope plays jazz. Yes, Lorenzo nodded. He told me once that music helps him think clearly. He said, God speaks to us in many ways, sometimes through beautiful music. Lorenzo explained that Pope Prevost also enjoys cooking simple meals. In Peru, he often cooked for other priests and for poor people in his community. The Vatican has many cooks who can make any food the Pope wants. But sometimes on Sunday evenings, he asks for basic ingredients and cooks a simple meal himself. He learned many recipes from the people he worked with in Peru. The interviewer made a note. What else can you tell us about his personal habits? He reads a lot, Lorenzo said. Not just religious books, but history, science, and novels too. He believes a good leader must understand many subjects. Every night before sleeping, he reads for at least an hour. Lorenzo shared a story about the Pope's reading habits. One day, a young Swiss guard was reading a book about space science during his break. The Pope saw him and asked about the book. The next day, the Pope had ordered the same book and was reading it too. But what surprised many people in the Vatican was the Pope's love of sports. Lorenzo explained that Pope Prevost follows soccer closely and sometimes watches important games. Last month, there was a big soccer match between Italy and Spain. The Pope watched it with some of the Swiss guards who were off duty. He cheered when either team did something impressive. He said he could not pick a favorite because he loves both countries. The Pope also tries to stay healthy by walking every day. Lorenzo often guards him during these walks. He walks fast for a man his age, Lorenzo said with a smile. Sometimes it is hard to keep up with him. He says walking helps him pray and think. He walks through the Vatican gardens for at least 30 minutes every day, no matter how busy he is. The interviewer asked if the Pope ever gets tired with his busy schedule. Yes, of course, Lorenzo admitted. He works very long hours. Sometimes his staff worry about his health. But he says there is too much important work to do. When he feels tired, he takes a short break to pray or look at the gardens. Then he returns to work with new energy. Lorenzo shared a sweet story about the Pope's kindness. Last week, it was my birthday. I did not tell anyone. I was guarding the Pope's office in the morning. He called me in and gave me a small cake and a card. I was very surprised. He said, Lorenzo, I saw on your file that today is your birthday. No one should work on their birthday without at least a small celebration. The interviewer smiled. He remembers birthdays. He tries to remember important dates for the people who work closest to him, Lorenzo explained. He says that leaders must care about the whole person, not just the work they do. Lorenzo also revealed that despite his serious work, Pope Prevost has a good sense of humor. He enjoys funny stories. Sometimes during long meetings, he tells a joke to help everyone relax. He believes that joy is an important part of faith. The interviewer checked her notes. After our next break, we will talk about the Pope's plans for the future of the Church. After the break, The interview continued with a more serious topic. The interviewer looked at her notes, and then at Captain Lorenzo. "You have been with Pope Prevost for his first weeks as Pope. What are his plans for the future of the Catholic Church? What changes does he want to make in the coming years?" Lorenzo sat up straighter. This was an important question that many people around the world wanted answered. The Pope has a clear vision for the Church. He often talks about three main goals. First, he wants a church that is closer to poor people. Second, he wants the church to be more open to everyone. Third, he believes the church must be more active in protecting the earth. Lorenzo explained that Pope Prevost had started writing an important letter to all Catholics about these goals. In the Catholic Church, these special letters from the Pope are called encyclicals. The Pope is calling this letter A Church for All. He has been working on it late into the night. It will explain his vision for how the Church should change in the next 10 years. The interviewer leaned forward. "Can you tell us more about what will be in this letter?" "I have only heard parts of it," Lorenzo said carefully. "But I know the Pope believes the Church has become too focused on rules and not enough on helping people. He wants to shift this balance." Lorenzo shared how the Pope had explained his vision using a simple example. He told a group of bishops, "If a hungry person comes to our door, we should not first ask if they have followed all church rules. We should first give them food. This is what Jesus would do." The Pope had also spoken about making the Church more welcoming to people who feel left out. Lorenzo explained this carefully. The Pope believes the Church should be a place where everyone feels welcome, even people who have made mistakes or who live differently than church teachings suggest. He says, "We can hold to our beliefs while still treating everyone with respect and love." This had caused some concern among traditional church leaders. They'd worried the Pope might change important church teachings. The Pope listens to these concerns, Lorenzo said. He tells them, "The truth of our faith will not change, but how we share that truth must change with the times." On the topic of protecting the earth, Pope Prevost had strong views. Lorenzo explained that the Pope had lived in Peru and seen how climate change hurt poor communities. He is planning to visit areas damaged by floods and fires. He wants Catholics to understand that caring for the earth is part of their faith. He says, "God gave us this world to protect, not to destroy." The interviewer asked about practical changes the Pope was planning for how the Church operates. "There are many," Lorenzo nodded. "One big change is giving more power to local bishops rather than controlling everything from Rome." The Pope says, "People in Africa or Asia know better what their communities need than we do in Rome." Another important change was including more women in church leadership. While the Pope maintained that only men could be priests according to church tradition, he was creating new roles for women. Last week, he appointed 3 women to the group that selects new bishops. This has never happened before. He also started a committee of women theologians to advise him directly on important matters. Lorenzo explained that Pope Prevost believed the Church needed to listen more to young people. He had created a youth council with members from every continent. The Pope told them, "You will help shape the Church you will inherit. We need your voices now, not just in the future." The interviewer checked the time. "We have a few minutes left. After our final break, please tell us about the most surprising thing you have witnessed while guarding Pope Prevost." The interview was nearing its end. The studio lights seemed warmer now, less harsh than when they began. Captain Lorenzo looked more relaxed too, as if sharing these stories had lightened a weight he carried. "Welcome back," the interviewer said. "Captain Bianchi, you promised to tell us the most surprising thing you have witnessed while guarding Pope Prevost. What stands out in your mind?" Lorenzo smiled, thinking for a moment before answering. "There are many surprising moments, but one night stands out above all others. It happened 3 weeks ago, very late. Most people in the Vatican were sleeping." He explained that he was on night duty outside the Pope's simple apartment in the Santa Marta building. It was around 2 in the morning when the Pope's door opened. Pope Prevost came out dressed in plain black clothes, not his white papal clothes. He was carrying a small bag. I asked if he needed anything. He said, "Come with me, Lorenzo. I need your help with something important." Lorenzo followed the Pope, confused about where they were going so late at night. They walked through quiet Vatican halls and out a side door. A simple car was waiting with a driver the Pope trusted. We drove into Rome, to a very poor area under a bridge where homeless people sleep. The Pope asked the driver to wait and told me to come with him. I was worried about security. This was not a safe place, especially at night. The interviewer's eyes widened. The Pope went to a homeless area at 2 in the morning, without proper security. Yes, Lorenzo nodded. We walked under the bridge where about 20 homeless people were sleeping on cardboard or thin blankets. Some looked sick. Many were very old. An elderly woman recognized the Pope despite his plain clothes. She had seen him on television. She tried to kneel, but the Pope quickly stopped her and asked her to sit. From his bag, the Pope took out sandwiches and water bottles. He had made the sandwiches himself in the small kitchen near his apartment. He asked me to help give them out to everyone there. Lorenzo remembered how surprised he was to see the Pope of the Catholic Church sitting on the dirty ground next to a homeless man. The Pope asked the man his name and how he had come to live on the streets. The Pope listened to each person's story. He did not rush. He asked about their health and their needs. One man showed infected sores on his feet. The Pope took a first aid kit from his bag and cleaned the man's wounds himself. The interviewer looked stunned. The Pope treated a homeless man's wounds. Yes, Lorenzo said simply. He told me later that Jesus washed his disciples' feet. He said, "If I cannot touch the wounds of the suffering, I have no right to call myself the leader of Christ's church." What happened next surprised Lorenzo even more. The Pope took out his phone and made a call, waking up a Vatican official. He ordered them to open an empty building near the Vatican that very night. He said, "We have empty rooms while people sleep on cold ground. This must end tonight." By morning, all 20 homeless people had been moved to the building. The Pope arranged for doctors to check them and for social workers to help them find permanent solutions. But here is the most surprising part, Lorenzo continued. The Pope did not tell anyone else what he had done. He did not call reporters or take pictures for social media. He said, "Good deeds done for attention are not truly good deeds." Lorenzo learned that the Pope had been doing this regularly, visiting different homeless areas late at night. Only a few people knew about it. When I asked him why he did this in secret, he said something I will never forget. He said, "The true measure of a person is what they do when no one is watching." The interviewer was silent for a moment. That is truly remarkable. We have time for one final question. The studio was completely silent as the interview reached its final question. The interviewer looked at Captain Lorenzo with genuine curiosity. "Captain Bianchi, you have shared many remarkable stories about Pope Prevost today. For our final question, tell us this. Has guarding this Pope changed you personally in any way?" Lorenzo took a deep breath. This was not a question he had prepared for. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then directly at the camera. "Yes, it has changed me very much," he said quietly. "I joined the Swiss Guard 8 years ago because it was an honor. My family was proud. The uniform is famous. The job is respected. But it was just a job to me." Lorenzo explained that he had guarded 2 previous popes. He had done his duty well, but he had never really thought deeply about the meaning of his work or of his faith. Pope Prevost changed that. One day during his first week, he asked me, "Why do you guard me, Lorenzo?" I gave the standard answer about duty and tradition. He smiled and said, "Those are good reasons, but not enough." The Pope had invited Lorenzo to walk with him in the gardens. They talked about deeper reasons for the work they each did. He told me, "We both serve something larger than ourselves. You do not just guard a man. You guard the faith of millions of people who look to the church for hope. And I do not just lead an organization. I try to keep alive the message of love that Jesus brought to the world." These conversations continued over the weeks. The Pope asked Lorenzo about his own faith, his doubts, his hopes. He listened without judging. One night, I was guarding his door when he came out late. He could not sleep. We talked for an hour about my family, my village in Switzerland, my girlfriend in Rome. He asked about my dreams for the future. No pope had ever asked me such things. Lorenzo shared how these talks had made him think more deeply about his own life and choices. I began to see that my uniform is not just for show. My work has meaning. I protect a man who is trying to make the world better. This matters. The interviewer nodded. So he has strengthened your faith? In a way, yes, Lorenzo said thoughtfully, but not in the way you might think. Pope Prevost does not demand blind faith. He encourages questions. He once told me, faith without questions is not faith at all. It is just following rules. Lorenzo explained how the Pope had helped him see faith as active love, not just beliefs or traditions. Last month, I told the Pope I was troubled by the suffering I see in the world. If God is good, why is there so much pain? He did not give me an easy answer. Instead, he said, I do not know why suffering exists, but I know we are called to reduce it where we can. This is what faith means. Lorenzo shared how the Pope's example had inspired him to volunteer at a soup kitchen on his days off. He had never done such work before. The Pope does not just talk about helping others. He does it. And now, so do I. As the interview neared its end, Lorenzo made a final point that seemed important to him. Pope Prevost is not perfect. He gets tired. Sometimes he is frustrated when change comes slowly. Once I heard him raise his voice when a Vatican official refused to help poor families. He is human like all of us. Lorenzo looked directly at the camera again. But he is trying to live what he believes. He is trying to make the church more like what Jesus wanted. And watching him try so hard, with such honesty, has made me want to be a better person too. The interviewer thanked Lorenzo for his candor. As the studio lights dimmed and the cameras stopped, Captain Lorenzo Bianchi stood up and straightened his uniform. Tomorrow he would return to his post at the Vatican, guarding a pope who was quietly changing the church and who had changed him too.